Hello, everyone, and welcome to Working Circular, integrating circular economy principles at work. As we get started this evening, I invite you all to fill out the two short polls that you see in front of you. Oh, look at this, I see you all responding, thank you. We'll get some feedback from those polls in just a few minutes. I want to take a moment to recognize the three organizations that made possible the hosting of this event. Leaders in Energy, DC EcoWomen, and the Aspen Institute Green Team. I want to say thanks to all the volunteers from all those different organizations for making this possible. Special shout out to the Aspen Institute AV team who are helping us with the platform this evening. All right, so we've got a relatively straightforward agenda for you all today. I'm going to be speaking for a few minutes, and then I'll introduce our three panelists, and we'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes. And at that point, we'll open the floor for question and answer from you all. And you can ask questions at any time. We've got people behind the scenes who are moderating the questions as they come in. So please use the Q&A toolbox rather than the chat function. And I'll remind folks as we go along, A, to ask questions, and B, to ask them through the Q&A box. So I'm your moderator tonight. My name is Clifford Devin Deaton. I'm a program associate with the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group. I'm also the co-chair of Aspen Institute's Green Team. We're the internal sustainability task force for the Institute. I'm also, my multiple hats, the immediate past chair of the Circular Economy Group and current strategic advisor for the Circular Economy Working Group. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We also, our panelists this evening have invited you all to connect with them on LinkedIn as well. So before we get too deep into our topic, I wanted to mention the Leaders in Energy Circular Economy Working Group. Three organizations came together to put on this event today, but most of the hard work of event design and all of the work that went into promotions just about were undertaken by volunteers from the Circular Economy Working Group. The Circular Economy Working Group arose out of a series of annual circular economy workshops hosted by the Leaders in Energy organization. And since 2018, we've held monthly meetings. And about a year ago, we also launched a monthly happy hours. So please join us for future events. They tend to be a little bit less formal than this webinar. But all kinds of different topics are discussed, and I'll get into some of that at the very end of our event, showcasing what is coming up. I want to give a shout out to a few particular volunteers who put in a lot of hours making this possible. Elise Vernon, Nancy Najarian, David Geyer, Itayanesh Asfa, Lorraine Isabati, Shira Ramesh, Isabella Barriga, Julia Gross from DC EcoWomen, Benet Brotman from DC EcoWomen, and Gabby Seltzer, who is the vice chair of the Circular Economy Working Group. Okay, so on to our topic, the circular economy. We've got, I'm going to end the polling now, and we asked two questions. I'm going to share the results with you all. And, we asked, how familiar are you with the circular economy framework? And we have an interesting breakdown. A lot of people somewhat familiar, good to see. A lot of you very familiar. And for those folks who are not that familiar with the subject, I'm going to do a very short introduction to the concept. So the circular economy is a sustainability framework that aims to design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. And this is a really a new way and an attempt to design, make, and use things within planetary boundaries, right? Many of you are likely working in a role that you're engaged on sustainability issues. Some of you might be members of your internal organization's green teams, and maybe some of you are working in the corporate world or in government. But whoever you are, welcome to this discussion. So, you noticed this definition on our event registration page, but I wanted to introduce a couple of places that you can go to learn more about the circular economy kind of at your own pace. The first is the Ellen Macarthur Foundation, who is really a thought leader in the circular economy space. You can Google the name Ellen Macarthur Foundation and find their website. And the next one is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, who we have represented on our panel this evening. So, Ellen MacArthur Foundation talks a little bit about the circular economy in terms of shifting the way we think about everything and every way we do business. Governments, the way we have individual behaviors, our cities, products, the jobs that we work in. By designing out waste and pollution and keeping products and materials in use, we're really reinventing everything that we're doing. And that's a pretty huge task. It's a pretty huge topic. It's as broad as the global economy and as personal as the behaviors, the food and products that you use, before breakfast. So we're not going to try to tackle everything about the circular economy tonight, and I don't want to give too much more of a kind of a lesson on circular economy principles. We're instead going to focus on a particular aspect of the circular economy, one that we're all pretty darn familiar with, which is our workplaces. And so again, if you want to learn more about the concept generally, visit Ellen MacArthur Foundation or join us for our circular economy working groups in meetings in the future. Oh, there we go. So it can really seem like we spend more time in our workplaces than anywhere else. And this is so much more true today as many workers are working from home, and home and office have become one. The caveat to that is we need to respect the truth that not everybody has the privilege to work from home. We are going to talk a bit about your home environment as a place for the circular economy, but we're not exclusively talking about working from home and the circular economy. So I think as we think about the workplace, we should really think about our behavior as individuals, how much waste we produce as a part of our daily activities at work, whether that's printing paper or going into the kitchen at the office or the kitchen at your house and running the water, using energy. And there's ways in which we can implement circular economy principles into those individual behaviors to improve and make a difference in our lives. I also want to really challenge us to think about the ways in which, as employees, we can help our organizations make internal shifts to become better ecological stewards. And there's many ways, whether that's through your internal green team. If you don't have one, think about starting one. If you know you have one at your organization and you're not a part, you can join. I'm happy to connect with you on that, and our panelists will have lots to say as well. So ultimately, the goal we have as a society is to create a transformative groundswell of internal action within companies and organizations to implement the circular economy. So without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's speakers. We have Danielle Nkojo, who's the manager of the Global Sustainable Products at Kontoor Brands and the Circular Economy Club here in Washington, DC. We have Stephanie Potter, who's the executive director of the Sustainability and the Circular Economy program at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Corporate Citizenship Center. Welcome. And Xingyin Zhu from is the Global Sustainability Manager at World Resources Institute. Welcome to you all three. So as we move into questions, if you've got questions for our panelists, shoot those out. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. Shoot those questions over through the Q&A box. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint because we're just going to talk. All right, so let's get started. Danielle, you are, here in the DC region. What do you think is the state of the circular economy here in DC specifically?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the circular economy in a city like DC. There is a really passionate citizenry, certainly seen proved out lately. And so folks are interested in improving the places where they are. And so I think perfectly exemplified by the Circular Economy Working Group. This wasn't something that the government had to lead. And so while I was working for the government, I was proud to be part of the circular economy community here. But I think it was really important that there was a kind of grassroots circular economy working group of people from all kinds of backgrounds who were just interested in the subject. And so I'm really hopeful about it moving forward, becoming more of a public policy in the district. But I think the groundswell from the citizenry in DC is going to continue.
Great. And so tell us a little bit more about your work as a member of the Department of Energy and Environment, because you are really a champion for the circular economy within our community.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I'm so glad to be part of the community. You find your tribe sometimes, and it's great. So yeah, I was part of Sustainable DC, which is the 20-year plan. It was the 20-year plan. Now there's only about 14 years left. But it was a 14-year plan to make DC the healthiest, greenest, most sustainable city in the nation. And within that, there were about 167 particular actions that we thought were reasonable steps to get us toward that broader goal. I had the pleasure of chairing the Waste Working Group, and it was great because we got really diverse voices to contribute to the waste section of that plan. And DC is a city of plans, right? A lot of cities have a lot of plans, but what I felt most hopeful about was we had seen other plans. The plan when it started in 2013. Some of the actions that were in that plan in 2013 had come into law, like the foam ban, like the bag fee. And so we are really hopeful, but that some of the new initiatives that have been added to that plan will later become, again, part of public policy, part of legislation.
Thanks, that's great. And I just, as a side note, the Circular Economy Group was able to participate as a stakeholder in that waste working group discussion. So thank you for offering and creating that space for us to participate.
Yeah, it was great to have your energy.
So Stephanie, you know, the global economy keeps chugging along, you know, with fits and starts. The COVID situation has certainly made a big impact, but I'm interested on your take on the circular economy nationally, and also perhaps globally, if you feel like commenting on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we started, you mentioned Ellen MacArthur. I think our first sort of crack at this was about 5 or more than 5 years ago now, maybe closer to 8, just really socializing the term and the concept and what it represented in the US. And that's because a lot of our companies that we work with, and I can get into a little bit of by way of background promo, just so that people are understanding where we sit across the corporate space. But a lot of our companies who had active presence in Europe, because they're multinationals, they're either headquartered there, they have, you know, large offices there, kept telling us this is a very obvious business play, because instead of sustainability for the sake of environmental benefits and sort of, you know, recapturing, it's kind of got this, you know, business friendly economy piece to it, where it's really a repurpose of existing sustainability strategies in a way that has to do with generating economic return from recovered material and recovered value from products and services. So, you know, for us, it made a lot of sense because the Chamber Foundation sits sits alongside the Chamber, which is the largest business association in the world with over 3 million businesses of all sizes, and reach through our American chambers globally, reach through our local regions across the US through local chambers. We even have large industry associations that roll up as chamber members alongside companies. So we're very, very sector diverse. We're very, very large. We work with the largest companies here in the US. And the foundation, as opposed to the chamber, which represents sort of the interests of companies to perform well economically in this country, our interest is really sharing the story of how businesses can also be a force for good. So all that background is to say circular economy about 7 or 8 years ago really became a core part of our portfolio within the sustainability issue, because it just makes so much sense for business. And so what I would say is we were heavily leaning on the direction of our European companies for whom this was older. And now I think we're at a place where, instead of sort of beating the drum on the term and the concept and what it could look like, we're really starting to talk about tactics for implementation with the businesses, both in our network and just more broadly across the US that are working here, how it can be utilized, how it can be messaged and communicated to different supply chain partners, and really starting now to look at what are the returns, like really tracking like monetarily what has corporate transition into the circular economy space. What has that actually done for the economics, for example, of a region? So we looked at this in the Great Lakes region because it has such a footprint of states and businesses and such a high sort of material flow out of that part of the country. And it's got such a huge natural resource in water. So really, what does it look like when companies that are headquartered or footprinted across the Great Lakes region, when they move into full circular economy transition, what does that do for the Great Lakes region? And what does that do also environmentally, right? Because waste has no border. So how does that actually impact the environmental footprint of a region? All that's to say, there is a lot of going on now, more than there was. We no longer are leaning on just our European company voices to understand what this is. I think it's becoming a little bit more commonplace, and it's becoming increasingly interesting. We've also been doing a really cool set of tracking around what is the opportunity of the circular economy during COVID, right? So when it comes to resource constrained hospitals, when it comes to disrupted supply chains, flow of food off the farm and into the hands of people that need it, when those needs, when the demand shifts from restaurants to consumer households, how do you sort of think about in recycling continuity, when recycling systems are disrupted, when layoffs are happening at the municipal level, like what is the implication of not getting recycled feedstocks into the hands of folks that need it, and what is the opportunity when you do? And so we've been having a lot of conversations around that whole during and post-COVID circular economy opportunity as well. So lots to talk about. We can get into more of those details.
Yeah, no, I've got about a list of about 5 questions just from hearing you make that introduction. It's wonderful. Are you finding that companies are readily adopting this, or are you are they coming to you with saying like, hey, do you have some tools or best practices that we can start implementing on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, part of the Chamber Foundation's mandate is to produce publicly available resources, toolkits, best practices, case studies, research for anyone that wants to use it. So that's kind of our philanthropic mandate, if you will. I mean, and we're getting asked about this stuff all the time, which is great. And by the way, we do have a shelf of resources. That was a thank you for the plug, but we're the only ones doing it. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can be sort of an aggregator of what's out there and drive traffic in the right direction. So if you are specifically trying to solve for plastics reuse and capture, or if you're specifically trying to solve for consumer education or in workplace education, like if there's specific things you're trying to tackle within this whole sort of circular economy banner, we want to be able to sort of say, yeah, the best group is this, the best resources are that. So in addition to producing our own stuff, in partnership with the business community and a lot of the solutions providers that are out there, we're also trying to be kind of a gatekeeper for what's the right set of resources for different needs.
Great, thank you. So Xingyan, World Resources Institute is a leader in nonprofit sustainability. And I know that you are leading the way within the organization for kind of internal transformation. Tell us a little bit about the changes you've helped implement in the WRI office.
Yes, thanks, Clifford. So WRI has always had a sustainability program built around the idea that as an environmental nonprofit and think tank, that they really wanted to walk the talk and road test the research and data and tools that they created for an external audience and apply that internally. So essentially, my team and I work on finding ways that we can adopt some of those principles in our operations. One of the first things that WRI did was to do a GHG inventory of its operations and set science-based targets for absolute emissions reductions. And while we are approaching our 2020 targets, we've actually managed to achieve one of our 3 targets despite a 3 to 4 times growth in our organization. We've gotten a 50% emissions from electricity reduction in the last 9 years. So we're very proud of that. But some of the other things that I'll probably mention throughout this are some of our different programs that are focused on engaging our staff, finding ways that we can really test out different ways of engaging folks on sustainability, on circular economy, and really bringing that data story together too. So we do these initiatives, we track it, and then we bring all of that together with the data, with the outcomes, and talk about it and find new ways that we can keep experimenting. It's a continual process.
Yeah, great. And I know that you use a lot of technology to be able to generate that data from whether that's from the kind of the employee side or travel. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in which the tech platforms work for you?
Yeah, we do a lot of different data tracking, and ideally it'll all come together at some point. In a few weeks, we're launching on our website, wi.org/sustainability, our digital platform for sustainability reporting. Since 1999, we've done GHG emissions inventory reports, and we make this report in a PDF form and put it on our website. And honestly, I'm not quite sure how many people read all of the different reports. So to make it more engaging and accessible and really try and find new ways to talk about it more, we've been working on putting that data in an interactive website that's more about the story, connecting those resources, making it easier to digest and really engage in, and ideally others will follow along and also start tracking their data and sharing it and reporting it.
Great. So Danielle and Xingyan, feel free to jump in on this one too, and Stephanie, if you've got thoughts. Danielle, I was really wondering, like, how, given your time in DC government, you know, what has the government done to advance circular economy principles within the workplace? So not just generally across the entire population of the town, but like within the buildings and business practices that are underway. Oh, Danielle, you're muted.
There we go. Technology. I think one of the best examples is that, you know, we tried to walk the walk at the Department of Energy and Environment and added composting or compost collection at our facility, at our building. It's a unique challenge when you're in an office building that's not owned by the government or not, you know, kind of owned by your principal. And so we were 3 floors in this larger building, and had to figure out how to get the bins in the garage bay and communicate out to the folks that are just on our 3 floors how to divert their material. And we had the unique challenge of, you know, it was the Department of Energy and Environment, so there are a lot of people that know a lot of things about a lot of aspects of the environment, so they assumed they knew everything there was to know about recycling. And so it was an interesting learning curve, but I think what was important is that, you know, we were talking about reducing waste and moving towards zero waste as a city. And so we had to set an example as the Department of Energy and Environment to lead by example in our workplace. And especially universal recycling list that was, you know, the same list for whether you were at home, at school, or at work. We wanted to be clear about communicating that in our workspace and not just letting what was recycled be dictated by our collector. And so we were helping to essentially train the trainers, right, by preparing and equipping our own employees to go out and evangelize waste diversion throughout the city.
Thanks. So I know that at the Aspen Institute, the Green Team has posted a number of the Zero Waste DC's signs about recycling guidelines for the city. And so those have been incredibly helpful. But, and Xingyan, you could probably speak to this. I think you were getting at, Danielle, the idea of like aspirational recycling within the office.
Wish cycling, I've heard it called.
Yep. hope for the best when it actually, in fact, it's you know, a contamination problem. I don't know if you all have had successes retraining staff to recycle in a really successful way.
Yeah, I could share a little bit about WRI's approach, and I really do. The story about the compost bins resonates with me, Danielle, because we also had similar meetings with multiple people over and over again about that process. But we actually had to start off our entire compost program and our zero waste initiative with a recycling campaign because a waste audit had revealed that recycling contamination was a huge problem for WRI, and I think there is a little bit of that attitude that you want more to be recycled than is the reality. And so people were contaminating the bins with organic waste and all sorts of liquids and food waste. So we couldn't even get our building owner to do a compost program until we addressed that. And one of the strategies that was really effective for us was being specific. That sounds a little silly, but we didn't do the universal big sign with 20 different materials that go in each bin. The waste audit provided us a lot of insight on what some of the key materials were that were really problematic. And we did different campaigns focusing in on those materials, highlighting specifically what you do with that coffee cup, and then ideally shifting them away to the reusable cups. So once we started to see that go down, we then introduced the composting process as well. And now we do quarterly waste audits with staff as a hands-on activity. Surprisingly, we get 15 or so volunteers every quarter to dig through the trash. And as a result, we get good data, but the folks that participate learn a lot too about what is recyclable, what isn't. And oftentimes there are questionable materials that we can't figure out, especially food takeout containers without labels. And so that leads to the next iteration of the campaign where we ask people, avoid takeout containers, bring your own lunch ideally, or eat out and use those reusable plates that are nicely washed for you by the restaurant.
Yeah, I think the 2 mandatory field trips that employees can sort of drive their colleagues to take is one, doing a waste audit and doing back of house inventorying, because it's dirty and it's weird, and you just get so much respect for how hard it is to do it right, and also how lazy some people are with respect to what they think is recyclable without even washing it out. Anyway, so that's one, and then the other one is visiting a materials recovery facility. Same thing, right? But you're seeing it at the collection side in terms of all that gets kind of aggregated. And I think it's interesting now, while we're not in workplaces, it's also a matter of like challenging the systems, because we're all at home and we're all doing takeout as a sort of, you know, COVID management strategy and whatever other reasons. And also, I think people are doing a lot more. EPA just did a big roll up for Earth Day this year with Keep America Beautiful and some other partners of theirs. We were involved around messaging sort of during COVID, what is the best practices in recycling at the household level, because all these employees have now gone home and they're bored and they're doing, you know, more kind of spring cleaning projects and they're eating out in different ways. And so it's its own problem at the household level right now, where it was traditionally kind of an interesting exercise at the workplace level. So we'll go back at some point, but I think it's going to end up shifting a little bit the patterns of where waste happens and what's possible. We actually did in partnership with TrueCost a couple of years ago, we did something around kind of the idea of what gets measured gets managed. And we looked at the largest businesses in the country, the waste audits that they had, like basically all of the economic value of all of the wasted material, both organics and paper and other sort of office supplies wise. And the numbers were astronomical about what you could kind of reduce just by implementing better capture systems at the workplace. And so that while it's a little old, but it might be useful from sort of an employee toolkit perspective, just to sort of take some of the findings in there. I think it was cut, if I remember correctly, by industry. And so, you know, just depending on where you sit, just having kind of data like that about sort of why it matters from sort of a returns and savings perspective, as well as from obviously the sort of reasons we all care about with respect to emissions and environmental impact.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I just got a chat pop up from Gabby, who says that in August, we're going to be hosting a happy hour event just on waste audits with the EPA. So if that's something that you all in the audience are working on, please join us in August, and we'll send you an email about how to join us for that event. So great. So you know, Stephanie, you're working with lots of different companies. What are they telling you about their own workplace practices? Are they, you know, so, you know, a lot of businesses are focused on, you know, well, we're going to retool our supply chains and such to be able to be more circular. But what are they making, implementing changes within their own workplaces?
Yeah, I mean, good question, because I do think you hear the sexy stories of sort of, you know, kind of designing for bio-based and supply chain logistics and all the cool things you can do and how much of an impact it makes when Amazon switches to, you know, kind of biofuels in its fleet versus, you know, oil and gas. So but it is when it comes down to like how, you know, these companies are dealing with their own employees, and different kinds of companies have different headaches, but it is not. And I mean, Danielle, you can speak more to this, you're in a brand, but I will say, you know, the same people who you hear out there that are on the speaking circuit talking about all the cool things they're doing from a corporate level perspective, they're still beating their heads against the wall about how to solve for the individual office, you know, because a lot of times, and one thing we're doing that's a very good window into the challenges here is we have this kind of place-based initiative that's kind of a coalition of companies coming together that are kind of across the recycling value chain to support doing really regional analyses of current recycling practices, kind of opportunities for intervention, and then and what, you know, what sort of the highest opportunity interventions look like for that region based on what they have in place so far, how they're working with their haulers. It's called Beyond 34, and the idea for that is that we're stuck at kind of a 34 or 35% recycling rate. So how can we, by working through, you know, regions, which is ultimately every region has different recycling standards and practices and bans, and so every region's got its own specific microcosm of what's there and what's possible and what's being done and what the rates look like. And it's been a really interesting window because you've got these multinationals who have their local stores and their local employees getting involved. And then you've got a lot of the municipalities involved in the sort of working groups. And you're really starting to see sort of where the where the fall off is. Like, is it at the residential? Is it at the commercial? And commercial is a huge challenge. And so what we've been doing as part of that, where it sounds like people are getting stuck, is because a lot of these offices they don't own their own floors, right? So then you're really having to depend on the building managers and the sort of leasing companies. So it's not actually the company that's in the building, it's the company that owns the building. And so you got to get them involved in getting this, so it's not always who you think is responsible. I mean, besides employees and all of us doing our part, but it's more complicated. And same at the facility level too, right? So if you've got companies that have distribution sites or warehouses or inventory, kind of discard centers, solving for kind of recycling and recovery at that level is also challenging. And increasingly these companies have zero waste to landfill targets. And it really is, it's like that last mile. You can get 90% of the way there through supply chain engagement and through all kinds of stuff. But then it's that last mile of real challenge where it comes to like the actual place-based work. I think we're still trying to figure out. And I say we in the general sense.
Yeah. So Danielle, I want you to comment on that from your perspective as from Kontoor Brands, but also Xingyan, if you wanted to after that mention and talk a little bit about the work that you've done with your building management.
Right. Well, I wish I could talk a little bit more about my work with Kontoor Brands. I was in the office all of a week before things shut down and have been working remotely since then. And so I'm really looking forward to opportunities to engage the staff and get involved with engaging the staff in some certainly waste diversion, but circular economy activities. But as Stephanie was speaking, I was thinking about some of the stuff we had done in DC, and particularly around textiles, right? Clothing. People got really excited about that. And I think people didn't think of it like here, the drudgery of having to separate all of my recycling or be so restricted into what I can do with it, or what feeling insecure about what they can do with it. I think the ReThread initiative and then working with other partners, like we did a big outdoor event with Optoro every summer. I think DC Goodwill, their Finding Your Good brand has really stepped out there and kind of made it a lot of fun to swap your clothes, to show people upcycling their clothes. And so my thought is that this gives people the opportunity to kind of rethink their stuff, right? Rethink their stuff at the end of its life. And so while that's not the textbook definition of the circular economy and may not involve some of the more technical aspects of it, I always think about, like, can we get part of the loop at least, right? And get people excited, carrying the ball through their part of the loop. And so we did ReThread initiative stuff. We did Fix It pop-ups. We had just started doing those. And people would stop at the table and they were so excited that they were doing this because they wanted the opportunity to reimagine their things at the end of its life. And so I think when you're doing things like that in the community, you're creating a culture, a circular economy culture, where people are starting to look at the things that they may not have any use for as a resource for someone else, right? Or they get it fixed and this thing that's been sitting in their drawer for 10 years, they're now using again. And so I think in the workplace is a great opportunity to do lunch and learns, to do volunteerism, and to do activities that promote that.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I mean, I think I'm glad you used the apparel and sort of the ReThread example, because I do think we're talking a lot about sort of workplace recycling, and recycling is of course one component of creating a circular economy, and it's kind of toward the end of the spectrum when you think of sort of a circular versus a linear economy. But there's so much opportunity kind of across the spectrum and across industries. And I think there's tons of examples out there. And I don't think I think workplaces are a great way to start educating and engaging folks in the discussion, but this stuff bleeds into everything we do. I mean, that's what, the sharing economy and all of the things we do around using Ubers and Lyfts instead of having our own cars. And, there's all these cool examples at the small scale of product garages where you're sort of, if you don't need a printer all the time, you need it sometimes, like go to the bank and rent one. And some of those things that people, used to have in their garage, but as we're moving to cities and as we realize that we don't actually need to have those things on hand and whatever other reasons people have, like those are huge opportunities in circular economy. So I think there's both levels kind of at all spectrums of company size and sort of footprint size, but there's also like lateral examples across different industry, different, different parts of the circular economy and that sort of chain as far as where things can happen.
Yeah, and on that kind of concept of the different levels, whether it's an individual or a workplace, I do think even as a tenant or a renter, there are actions that can be very impactful. Like as the WRI is not a building owner, we lease a commercial space, and it can be a challenge not being able to be the one to make those decisions, but there is still a lot of purchasing power in some ways too. When we signed a new lease for our space, that's when we engaged on LEED recertification of the existing building with the landlord. That's when we established our compost pilot because we knew it was a little bit of a concern for our landlord to have that compost storage. That was the time, we're signing this 20-year lease, so it's time to bring up some of the things that were challenging before on an everyday basis. And there's a lot of resources too for green lease languages. There's been examples of renewable energy purchasing negotiated as part of it, certain renewable energy efficiency standards. And so I think that's a practice that can be taken both at the business level or whoever you are that's renting the office space, but also at the individual level as rentees. There are options too, even if you don't own your house, for renewable energy purchasing, for waste options. Our service, Veterans Compost, for the compost collection at our office. Some of our staff use it for their residential collection as well.
Great, thank you. So Danielle, this is kind of a kind of a big picture question across, like you were working in government, now you're working in the private sector. What are the similarities, differences across these two sectors? How are they collaborating? How are they not collaborating?
Yeah, I can tell you, I mean, maybe it's just, I'd like to think it's going to be more than just my experience, but I feel like I made the kind of leap, despite what's actually happening in the world, but I made the leap at the right time, because this is when these larger, apparel manufacturers are really thinking about, 2021, 2022, everyone is talking about, 100% post-recycled content garments, right? They're talking about, can we make a compostable jean, right? Like you're having that conversation. And so I really enjoyed being part of the city's team when we were talking about setting standards, right? Setting those goalposts. And so I've moved over and I feel like I'm getting to set those goalposts as well. And that is a time when they're ripe for it. I think if I had kind of made this transition even 5 years ago, I would be, again, the person kind of banging my head on the wall and not being heard. But I think the conversations are really happening, and it's been a delight to actually kind of jump right in. We were talking about textiles earlier. Just as I was coming over, just as I joined the company, we had been a member of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the Make Fashion Circular initiative, but we actually joined Jeans Redesign. So we're actually talking about what are the principles for calling a jean circular, right? Like I get to have part of that conversation to say, we're not just going to toss this word around without meaning. We are actually going to define what it means to make a circular garment and set standards for that and hold ourselves accountable to those standards. And so I've been, I feel like I was doing that for the city, where we were essentially setting those goals and standards for our aspirations in the city, and getting to do that as part of a large multinational corporation actually still feels like fun. So, but I hope other people are making that transition, or who are entering the corporate sector, particularly around manufacturing, is starting to see the emphasis like that people are, I think there was a time when people were just giving lip service to sustainability, but I think no more. And particularly our current crisis in the supply chain has reminded people that perhaps we should think about shortening that supply chain. And I think, the circular economy is just that, right? It is the shortest supply chain possible. It is a short circular supply chain, as a matter of fact.
That's great. And Stephanie, you mentioned a few minutes ago thinking regionally, asking businesses to think regionally, working whether that's the Great Lakes region or a smaller one. Do you see companies picking up that idea of regionalism as a new way forward?
Totally, yeah. I think that's becoming increasingly important, and I think that's another reason why sort of engagement at the employee base is super important, because you know, depending on the industry, there's different challenges around how to sort of get things down at the local level. But yeah, but I mean, there's also, you know, like Ecolab's got this cool water monetizer tool that's very regional. Like, there's a lot of different tools out there depending on what you're trying to capture and measure that companies are using. Hilton's got some interesting stuff called EcoStay around kind of capturing kind of hotel by hotel impact. So yeah, I think there's stuff out there, but it would be really neat to see that kind of standardized and shared across like the folks that have developed those tools, you know, having them kind of available for players in each industry so that they're really comprehensively being utilized. But the short answer to your question is yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a place for future collaboration and expansion of the kind of the thought profiles and such. So great. So Xingyan, you've already talked about some, I'm guessing you've already mentioned a few of the things I'm going to ask you to discuss, but you know, within the workplace, what are some of the easiest ways that an office can become more circular? And then, like, how have workplace practices changed, you know, given the COVID situation that we're all facing? Like, have you had internal conversations? You know, nothing private, of course, but like, what is the future of office and workplace sustainability look like from your perspective?
That's a tough question. So I'll start with the easiest actions and then lead into where we're going, hopefully. You know, I think some of the, I wouldn't call it easy per se, but I think if you do have the resources and the ability to leverage the decisions, the things that are policy-based or that are at the building or infrastructure level have been the easiest to really get mainstreamed in our workplace, at least. So for example, you know, we started to engage in the LEED certification process, and that led to a lot of different meetings to get towards our green cleaning standards. But that's not something that we have to get all 500 staff in the DC office to engage on and make that daily decision. It was just back of house, we changed all the products. Similarly, with our energy goal that we've achieved, a lot of the activity around that has been updating and upgrading equipment, lighting. Very little of that, unfortunately, is due to occupant behavior, and that does make it a lot easier to achieve very significant reductions in electricity, in GHG emissions as well. But now that we're out of the office, that's actually a new challenge, because the office is all shut down and we don't have much energy use or waste production, but we're assuming that's now shifted into our personal GHG emissions or in our personal footprints and environmental impacts. So what we're trying to do right now during the shelter in place is really focus on the wellness framework. A lot of workplace certifications around wellness really think about indoor air quality as well as waste and energy and just general occupant health. And so we've translated the wellness certifications into an awareness building program where we share a little bit about what workplace wellness would mean and then how you can take it back to your own home. So a green cleaning policy at work was not something we shared before, but now we talk a lot about, well, why is this important? You're spending now 99% of your day in your home. So having cleaning products that don't lead to any respiratory illness in the long term is really important. And here are some resources to find that. Similarly, trying to share out resources for indoor air quality that links to updating your heating and cooling and ventilation systems, acoustics, food, all sorts of criteria. We've broken it into bite-sized pieces and have been sharing it out with the staff. In the long term, we also hope to really think about what the new normal will be once the pandemic is over and how we actually build back better and anticipate how this disruption can really lead to some new habits around sustainability and circularity.
And just a quick follow-up question on that. In terms of your internal communication channel, you said you kind of slice them up into bite-sized pieces and are able to share them out. Do you use kind of internal, like a internal Slack channel or something like that, or?
Well, we're on Teams mostly, but for the sustainability communications, I think one of our sustainability champions has mentioned we have to at least communicate 1.3 or 4 times before some of our staff actually process it and act on it. So we do have an internal website that's designed for our staff with all the resources laid out for home and office. But ultimately, we're sharing it out via our WRI newsletter that goes to all staff. We share it via emails. When we run specific campaigns or have a brown bag, we link it back. Just recently, we're launching a business travel behavior and motivation survey. And in that, we've also inserted posts related to business travel that we've talked about in the past. So anytime we get an opportunity to talk about things, we insert some more previous content and resources as well.
Well, I want to switch gears ever so slightly and ask a couple of questions that came in from our registration portal. So as folks registered for tonight's event, they were prompted to, if you have a question for our panelists, go ahead and ask. And so this is one of them. You know, from this, and this is to all 3 of you. Feel free to just jump in as you see. From your different perspectives, what are ways that we can integrate circular economy practices into a workplace that isn't particularly green? What's the highest impact you can make for the lowest effort? And Chinian, you kind of got started on that, but if Danielle and Stephanie, if you want to think a little bit about that.
Should I start, or what's the order of?
Sorry.
Whoever.
Well, I suppose for us, one of the things that makes it kind of unique is WRI is an environmental organization. So in theory, people presume that everyone at WRI is already kind of green oriented. But ultimately, we do have to sort of understand our audience. And I think that kind of approach may help even audiences that aren't so pro-environmental. So really thinking about what are the barriers to action and getting a little bit more into what's keeping someone from properly sorting their waste. And oftentimes it is practical and very detail oriented to really get at that action. We don't necessarily get into the conversations about the values behind it or some of the more global impacts, because on a day-to-day basis, we just want to make it as easy and default practice as possible. And so it kind of circumvents the need to have the are you a greenie conversation or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's an answer to that one. I mean, that I could give you that I feel confident about. I think that's just sort of the big question. People are, what can I do without having to do very much? I mean, I think you got to do something.
Yeah. So, oh, Danielle, go ahead if you had a.
No, I was just thinking kind of sneak up on them with it, like fun, like the clothing swap. I don't think the people who participated in like our we did a free cycle event. I don't think they were thinking of, they were like, I've got this organizer on my desk that I don't want anymore. And so, we got to have the conversation with them once they participated, but we kind of, made it like preschool, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or kind of like how you give dog medicine, you put peanut butter in it. Not that we're comparing. You kind of got to slip it in sometimes and then later say, good job, you did this thing. And I think that's actually sort of true with certain industries too, certain companies, when you say like, oh, you're actually doing this already in some ways.
Yeah.
So now I think, folks are trying to really own it and claim it as part of, the core of what they do. But on an individual level, I think, yeah, sometimes leading with the fancy terminology and the sort of data-backed reasons for why you're doing it is not as good as just doing a clothing swap in the corner of your office because you want new clothes and you don't like the ones you have, or a material swap or whatever it is.
Yeah, it sounds like Danielle and Stephanie and Xingyan, you're all getting at it, kind of the idea of building a culture change within the organization. You're not just telling people this is what they should be doing, but you're leading by example. Sounds great. Stephanie, this is probably a question best for you, but feel free to chime in. One of our registrants asked, what can employees do to communicate the importance of circular economy and sustainable principles to like C-suite executives?
Yeah, I mean, there I think it's kind of helpful to get the backing of the CFO. The CEOs, I think, typically are a little bit further down the path and being, kind of big picture and aspirational, and we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, and because our clients are doing it, and our competitors are getting ahead of us, and all the things that motivate a CEO are different than the things that will motivate a general counsel or a CFO, and so or a COO. So I think you do need to kind of make the case first to the folks that are actually managing the dollars and managing the, the risk analyses and all of that, so that you're able to kind of get an army of folks that say, yeah, this checks out from a sort of operational standpoint, what we are able to do and what makes sense to do. And then I also think you need to kind of come at it from both levels. Like, it's really great to have leadership buy-in on some of this stuff, and I think that goes a long way, and you certainly can't get very far without leadership buy-in, but it does help also to have kind of a grassroots bottom-up approach where, and I think you see this a lot in the case of CPGs, consumer packaged goods, folks that are facing consumers. When the demand is out there from the sort of folks that you're serving to make a change, sometimes you make it even if the case isn't there yet for the economics and the sort of things that the CFO would care about. I think the same can be said for employee sort of uprising, if you will, like in a good way, where, if enough of your employee base is saying, look, this matters to us that we work for a place that has these practices, or we're going to choose going to a place that has these practices, we're going to stay at a place. I think that also carries a lot of weight too, and not just for companies for whom employees are their core asset, like consulting firms, but for all companies who have employees. I mean, I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the, the kind of focus on ERGs, right? Employee resource groups and other things that companies are doing to make sure that their workforce is happy, because it's very expensive to have to recruit and retain and replace workers. So, I mean, not to take any of the sort of magic out of what we do every day, but I think we are kind of we're a resource too. And so the louder the resource is that you want to keep and kind of, cultivate, the more powerful that is from a changing behavior perspective.
Great.
I think for a nonprofit organization, from that perspective, I definitely agree with Stephanie that from the top and from the bottom approach is really important. But for our C-suite, I think it's a little bit, for our communications, we adjusted a little bit. The way we engage staff is a little different than the way we talk about the value of the program with the senior leadership. So for example, it's a lot more about tying it back to the mission and really making it essential, and not underselling it by saying, this is a value add, it's a nice thing, we should do this. It's really more about how does this connect back to the mission and the values of the organization, whether you're an environmental NGO or a humanitarian aid NGO or some other public sector. I think all of this does connect back to some of the work that we do, even if it isn't pro-environmental.
Thank you all. We've had folks coming in with questions through the Q&A box, and I'd like to at this moment invite Gabby Seltzer to join us to share out some of these questions with you all. So take it away, Gabby. What are folks saying from the participant side?
Hi, we have a lot of great questions, and I just want to start with one for Danielle, kind of clarifying the difference between circular economy and recycling. Those two ideas get conflated sometimes, and this person is asking, first of all, please clarify what's the difference, and second of all, why is the difference important, and why is it risky when we do kind of conflate those
Wait,
terms.
so Gabby, just to make sure I understand the question, the difference between what? I chopped out for a second.
Oh, sorry. Difference between circular economy and recycling.
Ah, okay, that's easy. Yep.
Yeah, so recycling is an aspect of the circular economy, but it is probably the most resource intensive aspect of the circular economy. On a whiteboard for you, but when we think about the circular economy, you think about the counterbalance to what has traditionally been what we call a linear economy, right? The take, make waste, right? So step one, step two, step three, and it falls out of the bottom as waste. The idea of a circular economy is that there are opportunities when one person finishes using an object or an item, it actually circulates back up into the system instead of falling out of the bottom. So the easiest way for it to recycle, right, is the sharing economy, essentially. Multiple people own something and it's used over and over again, right? Then there's the next loop on that cycle where someone actually may donate it and it goes to another person. And then there's the remanufacturing, right? Where it actually goes back to maybe the owner and I don't know, a shoe gets a new sole put back on it and it gets put back into the system, back into commerce. And then there is recycling, which actually takes an item usually down to hit its basic properties, the material it was originally made from, and then something is remanufactured from it. Recycling is probably, again, the most resource intensive, one of the most expensive ways to reuse an item, with certainly the exception of some very recyclable items. But the idea is that if we keep that circle tighter, right, we keep things more in the reuse, the sharing, the smaller circle part of the economy, that's the promise of the circular economy. But recycling is an aspect of it, but it is the outermost rung. It is the longest trip, if you want to think about it that way, around the circle.
Yeah, and I think on that, to that end, if you look at the circular economy only through the lens of recycling, you miss a lot of the economic and environmental opportunity because it's such a long way around. So to think about it at the very origins of the design process in terms of how to design waste out of the system. But better is if you think about how to recapture waste before it gets landfilled. So Danielle said it perfectly, but that's sort of two other kind of components to it, I think, in terms of where recycling comes in. But yeah, it's a common question, and to be honest, it's one that I once had too, but I have had to answer it before, so now I am.
Thank you. We actually got a lot of questions on the subject of diversity and environmental justice and kind of how that relates to circular economy. So I'll kind of read out a few of the different questions that were asked on this, and I think all three of you probably have insight from different perspectives onto this. So we can start with maybe Xingyin talking about how this comes to play on a workplace scale, since you were just talking about human resources and workers. Perhaps you can draw some connections between environmental justice and circular economy on the workplace scale. And then some other kind of questions for Stephanie and Danielle to think about are any of you involved in any diversity initiatives? And how do you see those as related to your circular economy initiatives? And does anybody have any examples of circular economy principles being used to kind of combat environmental injustice?
Very big questions. So I do think it helps to have that more holistic definition of sustainability in mind in the workplace to incorporate that environmental justice. So it's not always just about GHG emissions. It's also about what kind of products are you purchasing? What kind of land rights does that product come from and that material extraction point? What kind of worker safety and worker fair wage practices are there? And in order to do that, you do really have to incorporate those issues into your definition of sustainability and into your goals, and find a way to track that progress. So some of the tools that are out there using like GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, to really structure how you're tracking your sustainability. That tool also, that framework includes quite a few social justice factors as well as diversity and equity in the workplace, like the makeup of your board, the makeup of senior leadership. So, using that as an accountability measure is one approach. One of the other things that we're still kind of working on is sustainable practices in purchasing and procurement and contracting, which can get very detailed in the specific language and tricky to find certifications and things that you can actually find accountable resources for. But for example, when we purchase paper, we look for a number of different third-party certifications that not only look at the paper content and how the fiber is sourced, but also at the land use previously, if any communities were displaced as a result of this production company coming in, all the way to worker safety and wages. And I think there's just so many things you can look at. And one thing is that you cannot vet all these things as a one person or even a multi-person sustainability team in the workplace. So finding those right third-party certifications for every sector that you're purchasing in can help guide that process a little bit.
Thanks. Does anybody else have anything you want to share around environmental justice or examples that you've seen of companies or cities really walking the walk and connecting those dots between these two?
Yeah, I can share too. Danielle, you want to chime in first, or?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is I think about the organizing of informal waste pickers. There are people who essentially live amongst their city's trash and our trash that very often we export to other countries. And so when I think about the potential for the circular economy, it is to encourage the formalization of that work and the respect and bringing dignity to that work. Those folks have lived and subsisted off of kind of picking through these garbage heaps and then trying to sell their wares for, prices that vary depending on the whim of the buyer. And so I think there's such a real opportunity with the demand that is created when we start to think about circular systems in organizing these formerly kind of disorganized workers and very often they are Black and brown folks. They are the poorest folks in some of these countries. And I think there's a real opportunity to have them as, I always think about the circle and these little like kind of little pieces that kind of make this larger loop that we're calling the circular opportunity to build out that piece of the circle.
Yeah, and this is good because we're covering sort of different aspects of this. I will say the other thing that we are focusing on and actually have a conversation around likely the second week of July will be the idea that actually statistically, minority communities are more concerned with climate change, and that is often and are also often the ones that are most suffering the most disproportionately heavy negative impacts from air pollution rates and poor air quality. And so, we're going to have a conversation that kind of looks at that issue of kind of access to clean air and air quality, and also what the job creation opportunities of more green technology, green sort of jobs looks like, and how you can kind of come about on both ends, kind of getting folks involved in solving for disproportionately low air quality in different parts of the country and the world, but specifically in the US. So that I'm happy to share the details for that conversation once it's firmed up. But the other thing that the Chamber's doing kind of to start to gather more voices around the table for what the role of the business community is in environmental justice issues will happen tomorrow as part of a task force on inclusion and equality that has been stood up. So that is, I don't actually know if it's public or not, but it would be, if it is public, it would be on the Chamber homepage. So check it out. It's tomorrow afternoon as far as the sort of public town hall portion. I just don't know how public is public. But yeah, I think, kind of starting to have these conversations more intentionally is a good first step for a group like ours who has a lot of different voices that we can kind of hear from and sort of respond to and take action because of. So more to come.
Thank you.
I'll also add a short plug for actually the Leaders in Energy. They've partnered with some city agencies and nonprofits and have been doing an annual green jobs fair. And so we talk about we can talk about the circular economy and job creation globally, but there's a real local effort to make sure that people are in training programs, getting the skills that they need to take advantage of these jobs that are coming from this emerging, hopefully very circular economy.
Thanks. Quick follow-up question from something Sheng-Yin you mentioned about paper certification. Are there any good third-party certifications that you would recommend and that anybody else here would recommend?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think you do have to go by the products, though. Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. One resource that would be good if you are doing a comprehensive sustainable purchasing policy is the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. They offer a great discount for nonprofits. I saw in the poll earlier that quite a few of us are from that sector. And you have access to a resource that they've created with a number of stakeholders in each sector. And you essentially can look up for paper, for cleaning products, for building construction materials, for electronics. What are some ways you can procure sustainably? You can borrow the language for your public procurement processes, and they link to a number of third-party certifications. So for example, for cleaning, Green Seal is a great one to look for, and they also do really great blog posts about, recently with the coronavirus, what's effective and what's not effective for disinfecting. For paper, we use FSC for the fiber content, but we also have Rainforest Alliance certification that we look for, and Ancient Forests certification that we look for. So it really depends on the product itself, but that's a great resource if you're looking for a number of different certifications in different sectors.
Thanks. Next, we've got a lot of questions around the idea of plastic. Some folks are asking just how much plastic and also glass actually gets recycled, specifically in DC. So maybe Danielle can start with that one. And then after that, maybe we can talk about how do we design plastic out of our system, and what tips do you all have for environmental committees that are trying to work with their counties and their cities to make that happen?
Yeah, so I don't have the latest numbers, but the DC's Department of Public Works actually publishes an annual report that actually is the waste diversion. It's called the Waste Diversion Report, Annual Waste Diversion. It makes out by material what the recycling percentages are. I think the overall recycling rate, and I don't want to get in trouble for misquoting, was around 23%, if I don't have the exact number, but you can see that on their page, and they publish updates to it. What gets recycled? What gets recycled is essentially what gets captured. I think, and it's very interesting with the PPE and the conversation about the personal protective equipment that people are now seeing show up in our waterways. It's that, yes, we should minimize the amount of plastic that we produce, but most importantly, if we are using a recyclable material or anything that needs to be disposed of properly, that we are disposing of it correctly. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing the stuff that is actually in our system. So whether it be plastic, whether it be masks, whether it be gloves, that those are being disposed of properly and actually being captured and taken to our materials recycling facility. Keep in mind, they're commoditized, right? What happens at the end of that sorting facility as items are separated into their, 5 to 7 different types of commodities and sold for their value. And so, everyone has kind of an interest in these items maintaining their value through that system. And so the more we can capture, the more we can continue to keep those items as potential raw materials for reuse. They're always going to have a value. So we have an interest as a city, we have an interest in citizenry to make sure, as citizens, to make sure we're disposing of them properly.
Yeah, and I will make another plug for a sooner than mid-July conversation that we're having, not focused on environmental justice, but focused on specifically plastic and glass recycled feedstocks. So if you're interested in plastic and glass, it'll be with OI, who's the largest glass manufacturer, and with Dow, who's obviously responsible for a huge percentage of plastics manufacturing, as well as a municipal representative, so someone that's kind of in charge of City of Cincinnati's recycling system. She's part of the, what is her title? I don't remember, but it's published as of today, so you can find it. It's next Thursday afternoon, and it will basically be exploring exactly these questions. And so encourage you to pop on if you'd like that information. Also happy to share, but it will be posted soon, if not already, on the Chamber Foundation's upcoming events tab. So uschamberfoundation.org, just look for upcoming events. Yeah, you'll have all your questions answered and you get to see me again is the good.
I also did want to say that I think DC's number, I don't know, but the global number for the amount of plastic that is actually recycled, I think is about 9%. There was a very interesting study in Science Advances a few years ago that estimated from about the production of plastic in the 1940s and 50s to about 2016 in the study, that's the level of the plastic that's been recovered and remanufactured essentially. So.
Danielle, you broke up a little bit right when you were saying the name of the waste diversion data source.
Sure.
Mind repeating that?
Annual Waste Diversion Report, and it is on the Department of Public Works website for DC. And it will actually breaks out the waste that's collected into the various commodity streams. So you can see the numbers.
Thank you.
And I'll put a slight plug in too for the glass recycling program that has launched in over here in Northern Virginia. And so a lot of communities now, while they've taken glass out of the curbside recycling system, they have drop-off bins for glass. And a couple of weeks ago, I went and there was actually glass kind of coming out of the sides of it, which isn't good maintenance practice, but it also means that a lot of people in the community were participating. So I'm really excited about the growth of glass recycling in this area. So look for your purple bins.
Yep.
The question around kind of working as part of an environmental committee with the county to improve waste collection and recycling kind of is in that same area. Danielle, Nancy was talking about Fairfax County and how a lot of the waste that's put into the recycling bins ends up being trucked to a southern state and not being treated locally. So she asked a question around what advice you might have for an environmental committee that wants to work with the city on that, or the county on that.
Yeah, I live in Fairfax County, and I don't work for the government anymore, so I feel more comfortable saying this now, is that I think we need to do a better job in my own county communicating to folks what is recyclable and what isn't recyclable, so that we can reduce the amount of contamination, because very often loads end up having to be disposed of as trash if they are too highly contaminated. So I think there could be more communication about what is recyclable in our county, more kind of public information about it. We also have a pretty divided system here where I think it's the majority of the county, and please don't quote me, but there's a significant part of the county that doesn't use county services. So they, like each house on a block individually contracts with recycling haulers and waste haulers. And so there could be 5 or 6 different trucks coming to one street on different days. And so that's, I think there's some opportunity for efficiencies around that in this particular county. But yes, very often because this area, land values are so high, we are running out of space to manage our trash anywhere near Washington, D.C. And so not only is our plastic ending up going overseas very often, but even if something's managed here in the United States, it's going further and further away from our area. And hence, even more reason why there should be opportunities for us to think about diverting this waste, diverting our recycling as feedstocks for local small businesses and small enterprises.
Thanks. We've got a question for Stephanie. Can you connect new suppliers with companies who are looking for circular economy composites and plastics? Very specific. And I guess more broadly as well, do you have tips for how suppliers of sustainable goods can find buyers?
Yeah, so I don't think, but let me know if you have found otherwise, that there is such a marketplace for connecting buyers to suppliers with specifically circular kind of product offerings. I would like to build one. So that is sort of in the like wish list basket for 2021 onward, is to figure out how we can leverage some of the work we've been doing with our Beyond 34 initiative and some of the work we're going to be kicking off this coming year around specifically materials innovation with a first focus on plastics, to set up such a marketplace. I don't think, we would need to figure out a platform partner because we're not in the business of creating online, curated market, for sale, point of sale marketplaces, but eBay, there's lots of people out there that do that. So I would love to build such a place, because I get that question. I don't think there's an answer. I'm still trying to figure out if such a thing exists. The closest thing I have found is not actually this exactly, but it's a materials marketplace that U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development has spun off. And so that's happening in a couple of cities around the country. But it's specifically looking at kind of material flows. And I'm talking about this question's ask, which is, I am a small company with a circular product, or I am a company that's in the business of remanufacturing or helping companies to repurpose their kind of old and expiring products. Where can I find partners to work with at scale? So I guess check back in a year and a half plus, and we'll see. But or if you find something sooner, let me know, because we would love to work with them.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Gabby, can I chime in with that?
Please, everyone feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Stephanie, before, this was kind of just as I was leaving DC, the council passed a omnibus bill. I'm not going to say the full name correctly, but an omnibus bill that actually included the development of an exchange marketplace. I'm sure most things have been put on hold, but I'm happy to send you a link to take a look at the bill happening with Donate NYC and the marketplaces that they've set up there. And their first wave in New York has been, it was business to business, commercial to commercial. New York recently added their kind of food aspect to it. So a restaurant that had leftover bread, could bread as their feedstock, leftover bread as their feedstock. And so it is in the omnibus bill. Where it is now politically, and I couldn't tell you, but it was definitely a part of that bill, and I was thrilled to see it, because we were really hoping to model what's happening in DC around what's going on in New York. So
cool.
I'm sure
that's good to know. I mean, that's obviously a sort of regional level thing, but yeah, if that's it, I'd love to see how it's framed and what happened to it and how we can help, and that's great. Yeah, please do send it. That'd be awesome.
I'll keep you looped in.
So networking on the panel.
There you go, live action exchange.
Yeah. And a couple questions for repeating info that was missed. Stephanie, can you repeat where to find the info on next Thursday's panel?
Yeah, you can just shoot me a note directly. Well, I don't know if my contact information. Yes. So ask another question, and I will confirm that it is where I think it is, and then share it.
Okay, perfect. And then Paloma asked, what is the Green Job Fair mentioned? I believe that was Danielle talking about leaders in energy. So that was something that already happened, but also continuously happens often. So definitely look at the Leaders in Energy website for that information. A question for Sheng-Yin. Are there staff rewards that you found have been good incentives, or other inexpensive, healthy ways to measure and recognize circular economy?
Staff rewards are a fun element, but it really depends on the project, what we put the budget towards. So we do offer things like capital bike share discounts for our staff. We've purchased zero waste kits for folks that have done exceptionally for zero waste targets. But in general, I think we try to avoid too much of the kind of prize element. There's been this new move in our organization to really integrate a lot of behavioral science practice, and they've given us really interesting insights about some of the irrationality that we can predict about ourselves. And one of the things that does happen with a lot of financial incentives is that it tends to devalue some of the intrinsic value of doing some of the sustainable actions that we're asking for. So we use financial incentives very selectively when we've heard from staff that it is a barrier, or when we know that it's something that we can really offer, and it's not just devaluing the overall goal of the different programs that we run.
That's great, thank you.
And we have time for one more question, Gabby.
Okay, sounds good. And okay, that sounds good. Let's see, I guess to wrap up, does anybody have any examples of cities that are really leading the way in circular economy initiatives? That's a question from Janine, and maybe I'll let Danielle kick that off, since I know you have some involvement in the Circular Economy Club, which is about cities globally working in circular economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think something really exciting is that Charlotte, North Carolina has really stepped out there. I had the chance to talk to some folks there, and they were trying to figure out a niche for themselves, and decided that they wanted to be known as the circular city. And so created a circular economy strategy, which was probably one of the first cities in the US to develop around circular economy. They funded I think they're calling it like a circular economy barn, or like a reuse barn. And they chose almost like 5 companies that focus on take residence in that space. I think they just put another call out for participants at another level, but they've really been clear about identifying themselves, self-identifying as a circular city. And so they're a great example to keep your eye on.
That's what I was going to say, Charlotte. I think Phoenix has also done a little bit on this with Risen through Arizona State University. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the 2 cities that we have been partnering with on this Beyond 34 initiative, which are Orlando and Cincinnati. And then I think that there is another roll up through, who's it doing? I don't remember the name of the organization that's also tracking some other cities and what they're trying to do. But you know what, it might be a good spot more broadly than sustainability is the Bloomberg Cities Initiative, which is all about kind of jump-starting cities to do different things in the CSR lane. But I don't know that much about it, so I might be speaking out of turn on that, but worth looking at what cities are kind of raising their hand to do more with respect to mobilization in some of these arenas.
And Shingen, I know World Resources Institute works worldwide. Are there any other international cities that have stood out to you in your work?
I do think you're seeing a lot more in Europe, even on the waste and material recovery side. I think one of the things that has been challenging in the US is that our recycling is single stream and a lot of it is lost. But there are cities in Germany and Sweden that do a lot more granular collection of different materials, and that leads to a lot more access to be able to reclaim and reuse some of those things.
Yeah, and there, I mean, Amsterdam, we took a business delegation over there last year. They're trying to be the first sort of fully circular city, and they've got a lot of different examples of what they're doing with respect to the built environment, with respect to water reclamation, and sort of innovation hubs and startups and financing, all kinds of. So I will drop in the chat where I put the upcoming events link. I'll drop in the readout of that, that set of sites that we visited last year in Amsterdam, and I'll give you just some color as to some of what the cities are working on over there. I mean, this is, I think, you know, there's spots in Finland doing really cool stuff too, and Citra Foundation's been leading a lot of that work. So there's plenty of examples as far as what at a city level is happening on the other side of the world, but we're getting there here too.
Thanks, everyone. We've reached 7:30, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time to go and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you all. I am going to throw back up my PowerPoint slide here. I think I shared it here at the end of the evening. And so I want to make you all aware of the upcoming event that the Circular Economy Working Group will be holding its next happy hour on the subject of composting, so that if you are interested, please join us for that event. Thank you. Have a great evening.